Hello and welcome to the Doctoral College vlog series in conversation with the Doctoral College. I'm Deborah Curiton and I'm the Research Development Manager at the University of Wolverhampton.
And I'm Ben Halligan, I'm Director of the Doctoral College.
Okay. The vlog that we're going to do today is about your Viva. So we're looking at one concept in particular, which is around the difference between defending your work and being defensive about it. It's a really important concept because this is often where students kind of trip up in their Vivas and where they make the biggest mistakes is around them being a little bit defensive about their work and therefore not being able to engage in a conversation with their examiners about it. So Ben, what if you were an examiner and you were working with examining a student, what would you consider a defensive responses?
Well, examiners are asked to test the quality of the PhD, and that can involve a kind of stress testing it. So they play devil's advocate. They may say things they don't believe, but they want to see how the student is going to respond.
Yeah.
So they may say, why have you adopted a methodology aligned with Smith when you should have done one aligned with Jones? Now they may not think that's a reasonable response to the thesis, but they still will put the question out there to see how the student responds, which is part of the testing, the stress testing of the quality of the thesis. Well, I think there are two responses, and one is that the student can suddenly take this in a very literal fashion and become alarmed that they've made some huge mistake. It's been pointed out to them by the examiner, it undermines the entirety of the thesis, and the Viva is a disaster. So straight away they can take it personally, even get quite upset and quite agitated. And I think this is the wrong response. They need to defend, not be defensive. So they need to really not take it personally and be quite clear in accounting for the reasons that inform their particular choice, why they chose one approach rather than the other. So to defend their work and themselves from what is being said. And I think as well what's important is to return to the thesis in doing this. Not to kind of necessarily talk above it, but to say, well, I deal with that on page 30 or on page 100. If we look at that, you'll see that I've talked about this problem. So that in preparation, it's very important to actually have that information to hand. So that if you're anticipating a question, why have you used this approach? You can say, well, as I've argued here on page 30. So I think that kind of calm response, and if you're still not sure at the end of it whether you've fully responded, just ask.
Okay.
You know, does that answer the question, or would you like me to speak some more? That's a good strategy.
So often a defensive response comes from an anxious or a stressed position that often students find themselves in, and a fearful position that actually somebody's saying that their work isn't strong enough, and a fear that they're going to fail their Viva.
Exactly.
So it's not an intentional thing.
It's not, but it's a natural response, isn't
it?
You're worried, you're nervous, you've worked yourself up, this is the big day. You go in there, they're not going to spend 2 hours saying how wonderful the work is. So even if they think that, they're not going to do that for 2 hours.
Yeah.
So they're going to ask you these pointed questions, and a natural reaction can be, you panic and you think, oh my gosh, they're undermining. But I think what's important to remember is that this is akin to maybe a driving test, like you've passed or you failed.
Yeah.
It's not the Olympics, it's not crafts, it's not that you're falling behind and therefore there's going to be an issue. So we're having a more general conversation about the quality. We're not sniping at the work.
Okay. So I think in terms of my experience of Vivas, where students have been quite anxious, they've fallen into this defensive approach, and they've said things like, oh well, my supervisors think this work is really good, and that often kind of drives the examination into an impasse. So if you're a student and you find yourself in that sort of situation, you've kind of got there by through fear or anxiety, what advice would you give to a student to kind of start to pull that back.
If they feel they're panicking a bit.
Yeah, or they think they've been a bit defensive, and they can see that the examiners are kind of, okay, how do we handle this? How can they take control of that situation and bring it back round to being less defensive and more in the position of defending?
I would have 3 tips here.
Yeah.
The first, as I've already mentioned, is return to the text.
Yeah.
This is the home ground. You're
Yeah.
looking at this, you're talking about this. If examiners are saying stuff like, it's a bit lacking in detail, or these sort of generalities, it's very, very hard to respond to that. If you say, it's a bit lacking in detail, well, can we look at chapter 2 here? What detail could be missing? What could be added? Show me where. Then you're pulling them back onto dealing with the home turf. So tip number 1 is to lock it down onto the thesis itself. And that's familiar to you. That should calm you down a bit. I think tip number 2 is to see if you can talk about the positive elements of what you've done in terms of the difficulties perhaps behind the research. So that if, for example, they're questioning the methodology, maybe some sort of questionnaire methodology, that you've enacted, and they're talking about the design of the questionnaires, and you're finding it difficult, why not bring in another element, which is perhaps how difficult it was to talk to the groups of people you needed to talk to, accessing those people, ethical clearance. I think all of this is going to help your case. So it could be good to bring in some of that stuff. So you're not just dealing with their concerns about the questionnaire design.
Yeah.
The third tip is, if you feel that the panic level's rising, take a break.
Yeah.
Ask the chair, can we have a quick comfort break?
Yeah.
I mean, if you go in and they ask the first question and you say, can we now take a break? Obviously that's not how to do things. But if you've been in for a while, maybe 40 minutes, an hour, taking a break clears the air. And then when you come back, probably the examiners will just want to move to the next question. So I wish people would do that more, because they very rarely do that.
We have at the University of Wolverhampton a chair that has two roles in the Viva. One is to look after the student and the student's welfare, and the other is to ensure that the Viva takes place in line with our regulations. So often if a chair can see this situation playing out, they may well intervene and ask for a break as well, and just allow that situation to kind of calm down. In situations where I've seen students being very defensive in a Viva, that's often happened, and the examiners have gone away and talked about their approach and changing their approach to see whether or not they can kind of get underneath what is effectively a protection barrier. And sometimes they've changed their style of questioning. Sometimes one of the examiners has sat back and let the other one ask the questions because they feel that they're perhaps the trigger for defensiveness. So if defensiveness is mainly located in the anxiety and the stress of the moment, what tips would you offer students for helping to calm themselves down in a Viva?
I think that you need to know that the first 5 or 10 minutes are going to be quite scary, but you'll be okay after that. So you need to just ride through those waves of concern and know that you will be fine. You're not going to have 2 hours of panicking.
And examiners actually know that you're panicked and they know that you're anxious. Nobody forgets that feeling of anxiety from your own Viva. So they often try and work with you in the early questions, and they often ask quite general questions or chatty questions to help try and break some of that tension.
If they're nice, they should ask a few easy questions to begin with, or pay you a few compliments in terms of the work itself. So okay, another tip perhaps could be, rather than a kind of point-by-point defence, turn the tables a bit. So they've asked you why you've done it this way and not that way. They've asked you, how would you perhaps have done this differently? You say, well, can I ask you, how would you have done this differently if you were doing it?
Do you feel that really the student should be given an answer and then asking that question? So it isn't effectively the student, because I suppose if the examiners said, how could you have done this differently, and the student says, I don't know, how would you have done it differently? That's quite defensive, isn't it? So maybe adding in, well, perhaps I could have done this, perhaps I could have done that. Yeah, that didn't work, but I learned this from it, because, you know, the Viva is all about unpicking that learning journey as well as defending your work, and then saying to the examiners, but I would really appreciate your thoughts on that. You know, you are experts in the field. What would you have advised me?
So to tag a question on to the end, to say, well, I could have done it this way. Do you think that would have been as effective in terms of the data I gathered with the way that I did do it?
Yeah.
Often I find examiners at that point, it's as if they've slightly been caught out playing devil's advocate. and they'll say, no, of course I'm not suggesting this, I just wanted to see how you would respond to...
Yeah, but that then may well give the candidate that little bit of information just to help them calm down, know that they're on the right track.
Indeed. So, okay, what about various bits and pieces like breathing techniques and things like that? Would that help if you were feeling a bit panicky?
Yeah. Obviously, try and breathe. If you can breathe deeply, it kicks off various mechanisms and hormones in your brain, or chemicals in your brain, that help calm you down. So deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, something called square breathing. Have you heard of that?
Tell me about that.
So square breathing is where you breathe in for the count of 4, hold your breath for the count of 4, breathe out for the count of 4, hold your breath for the count of 4. And you do that a few times, and that will help to calm you down. I think we talked about in another video using psychological techniques, such as what sports psychologists do. Imagine yourself entering the room and being successful. So kind of some of that sort of stuff in preparation does kind of help you. There are some neuro-linguistic programming techniques that you can do called swishing. So it's a technique that I use when I'm presenting, because I hate presenting, and it takes a little bit of time to kind of build it up. But what you do is you use an object or an action or a picture that you can imagine or see, and what you do is you sit with that object. So for me it's my necklace, and you might see me do this if I'm stressed, and so what I've done is sat holding my necklace and imagining myself in a really, really calm state, in control and confident. And you have to keep doing that over and over again, so you invest time into that. And the idea is that activity will become linked in your brain with being calm and controlled and confident. And so if you get into a situation where you're not calm, confident and controlled, you can do the action that will immediately help switch you back into that confident place, or put you back on track to get into that confident space. So that may be, I know people who have done that to the middle of their hand. So you may see them in a meeting doing that. So find something that works for you. And
I think in addition to those things, the last tip I would give would be about the arrangement of the room when you go in there for a Viva. I think it's important that where you're sat as the student means that you're not kind of playing tennis. You don't have one examiner there and one examiner there and they're firing questions at you in stereo, but they're both in front of you. And that people are kind of in sight, and you're not in a situation where perhaps there's a door behind you and people are coming in and out and you're not quite sure what's going on. So to ensure the room is arranged to minimise distractions, so that you can just have a good focused concentration on the people that you're talking to.
And that is actually one of the roles of the chair at the University of Wolverhampton. They will look at the setup of the room, make sure that there are no distractions. So they will often be sat opposite a door, and you may see them go like that, which is telling people not to come in. And they do have that conversation with the examiners about what is going to be the most comfortable position for the student, so that that they're not having to do that sort of playing tennis activity.
Okay, so we have quite a few tips there.
Yeah, so learn how to be confident and controlled. know that defensiveness isn't going to help you in a Viva. Know that it's coming from anxiety. Control that anxiety, and if you feel that you're in that situation, try and take control from a different position, from a confident and controlled position, and move your Viva back into the defending your work position rather than the defensive position of your work. Okay.
Fantastic.
Okay, so that's the vlog about the Viva over, but look out for further vlogs. We will be doing a couple more on Vivas, one looking at how you deal with the post-Viva outcomes. So thank you, bye.